In today's competitive environment, we have to have more than ideas. We have to have truly big ideas. Now, hopefully today we are all thinking big, but let's take a deeper dive for the next few minutes into the right sides of our brains and consider 5 very big ideas. Now, these clever concepts have been conceived by the speakers to my left, who will each have a turn to present in 7 minutes or less their thinking to you. And you, in turn, will have a chance to vote on which idea is the most compelling. Now I want to introduce my partner in crime, Michael Maslansky. Michael is the CEO of Maslansky & Partners, and he is the mastermind behind the technology that we're going to use today that makes this session so very special. The technology is called SquareOff Analyst. It's an interactive technology that measures moment-by-moment reactions. So Michael, why don't you take a minute and tell us what we're going to do during this session?
We figure since you're going to be on your phones anyway during the course of this session that we ought to use it as a tool to help us understand not only which ideas are big, but what parts of each idea are really the most engaging for you as you listen to the big ideas. And so what you're going to see is a slider once you log in. And the slider will allow you to react on a real-time basis, moment by moment, to the ideas that you're hearing. And what we want you to do is react as you're listening. If some idea grabs you, if an element of that idea grabs you, we want you to slide the dial up towards 100, where it says strongly agree. If you don't agree with what you're hearing, you don't like it, you don't believe it's a good idea, slide down to 0. Use the whole spectrum. Let our speakers know which aspects of their ideas really work and which maybe need work. And then we'll be able to break it down at the end. Hopefully everybody's had the opportunity to get there now, and Elise, I think we're ready to go.
Hello, everybody. My name is Mark Bonchek, and I'm on a mission to update leaders' mental maps for the 21st century, and that includes all of you. Normally, I have a few hours, but I only have 7 minutes. So with your help, we're all going to update everybody's mental maps that are here today. So I'll begin with a story. Imagine yourself in Vienna in 1840s. A deadly flu-like disease. And the point is that we've been in the existing mental model of communications for about 500 years, ever since Gutenberg's press. You see, after Gutenberg's press, we've been living in a one-to-many world. A single sender to a large group of receivers in a passive audience. And if you think about it...
the red line is people who have been in the industry for under 10 years. The green line is people who have been in the industry for 10 years or more, because we wanted to see how tenure impacts your reactions to these different messages. Mark peaked at about 65, 66, and there were a couple places where I thought that there were some interesting differences. When Mark started talking about the Gutenberg press and going backwards, looking at old tools, the younger group, the less tenured group, went down.
That's the red group.
Didn't even want to hear it, the red group. And the most powerful piece, the piece where Mark got the biggest bump, was, not surprisingly, when he started talking about you. Every time you used the word you, the lines went up. Not a surprising finding, something that we see a lot in our messaging work. The more personal it becomes, the more likely people are to respond to it. And then finally, ending on a high note, he started focusing on the shift from content to context, and there were a number of bumps in there that people seemed to respond to well. So I think, big just piece of feedback. The story, it took a little while to develop up front, Mark, and so we saw some flatness up front, but some good bumps at the end.
So we have seen a dramatic changing marketing paradigm in the past 5 years, and its epicenter has been social media. And it's changed the lives of probably most of us in this room about how communication spreads, about what it is that really matters. We've seen a lot about paid, owned, and earned throughout this morning. And I believe that digital influencers are going to rule within this changing paradigm. So why is that? Why have influencers? And also, influencers tend to talk about things they're passionate about. So passion and enthusiasm, or passion and hatred, there are really big emotions wrapped up in this. Most importantly is that around these passionate first-person recommendations, they have reached, depending on the audience, they are reaching, I might be reaching 60,000 moms on Twitter. I might be reaching 100,000 readers of my blog.
So Stacey hit a high of 72. during the course of the presentation. There were a couple of areas that I thought were particularly interesting. When Stacy, when you said that the people say email is obsolete, the more tenured people in our group didn't agree with that. They're going to stick with email until they kick it. Then you talked about the influencers speaking in the first person, and people tended to respond positively to that until you said, no one believes brands anymore, at which point everybody responded positively. Clearly there's consensus in the audience that when it comes to being passionate and talking about something in a way that's influential, people don't believe brands. That was the first kind of high point that you hit. But really, the impact of this presentation, of this big idea, was around the idea that influencers drive purchase. That's where people responded. That's where we had the big bump. And probably the next best message that you communicated was that it's not about impressions. It's about the impression that you leave. That was the last bump over there. So all in all, good job.
I see a brand new day among all of us, and that has to do with technology. Because technology can return on investment. We have so much data that shows this, but what's harder to measure is return on community. But I want you all to know that it's equally as important. And when people are going to shop during the holidays, and so I see this vision. It's a new day, and we're going to build a physical space, and it's going to be awesome. The kids who are homeless can have a space to crash for a while until they get on their feet. We can cook them food, fresh organic food every day. They can cook it themselves.
Biggest gaps that we've seen between older and younger. There's a lot of talk about the millennial generation and how much more they are committed to social good and to what might be called return on community. That would be very much supported by the reactions here. You see the drop in the older group. It's where Sarah started talking about walking over needles in the Tenderloin. But I think the important takeaway from that is that when Sarah was talking about the problem, there was a general dip in response. But then right after that, where you see the bump up, it's where she started talking about the solution, started painting the picture of her vision for this idea of return on community. And the two bumps, both the places where Sarah's idea was best received by all of you, is when she started telling stories that really brought that to life. When it was a somewhat abstract idea, it was a bit hard to grab onto it, but the stories, the actual elements that describe what this could be, are the places where you all had the most positive responses throughout.
My name is Lauren Wesley Wilson, and I am the founder of an organization called ColorCom, Women of Color in Communications. The title of my presentation is called Push Me in the Water. I'm ready to get started, so let's dive on in. How many people in this room work at a company that has a diversity program? And when I'm talking about diversity, great, I see some hands raised. I'm talking about hiring practices that include gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and religious preference. So please raise your hand if you do. Okay, good, great, wow, okay. And of those people who had their hands raised, I was at Bloomingdale's the other day on the 3rd floor looking for a dress, and what I noticed is that all of the fashion designers are very segmented. You have Rebecca Taylor over here, DVF over there, Diane von Furstenberg over there. I think I just said that, but my point is that they're all segmented, and that's fine. And maybe it works in religious practices and in sports teams and in fashion departments, but it doesn't work in our industry.
The group doesn't like Diane von Furstenberg. That much became clear somewhere around the middle, and the fashion discussion is where things tend to turn down. But Lauren, the peak, which was actually right at the end, got up to 71.7. And I think the general takeaway that I would have from this is, first of all, you see an interesting difference between the more tenured participants in the group. Really had a much more favorable reaction overall than the more junior people, which is pretty interesting in the context of diversity. But in terms of the reaction to specific elements, it was the general propositions that generated the most positive responses, and actually the specific ideas that didn't generate quite as much engagement.
I have some sad news to share today. After years of being on life support, the PR industry that we know and love has officially passed away. Before I continue, I'd like everyone here to observe a moment of silence to pay our respects to an industry that no longer exists. As they say, all good things must come to an end. And when one thing ends, new opportunities arise. When marketing goes bad, communications is stuck doing the dirty work. If all advertising and marketing campaigns were first put through a communications filter, maybe we wouldn't have these hiccups. Or better yet, what if we own social and the market is reported into the chief communications officer? Unfortunately, in most organizations, the comms guy reports into the CEO or the CMO.
So people may say that millennials are focused on doing good, but every time you mention budgets, the younger group shot up. So there at 1425 and there at 1426 and a half, that's when we talked about getting more money for communications. Those were the two high points there. But really, when you started talking about owning social, about communications coming in and cleaning up for marketing, those are some high points in there. Of the 5 things that you think that we ought to be doing in the industry, building a social reputation hit the highest point among both segments of the audience. I think another reinforcement of the idea that the more that you talk about them, the more positive the reaction, since that relates to everyone here. And one other interesting distinction, the one place where we saw the biggest spread between the more seasoned members of our audience and more junior is when you talked about needing new skills, or that if you hadn't acquired new skills, you'd be dead. There was a lot of agreement from the people who've been in the industry for a while that they too needed new skills. So nice work, and we're all set. Thanks.